This is the Aston Martin Heritage Podcast with Wayne Scott and Garry Taylor.
On this episode, the Aston Martin Heritage Trust meets Nicholas Mee.
Discover more about the story of Aston Martin. amht.org.uk.
Well, hello and welcome to another Aston Martin Heritage Trust podcast. Wayne Scott here again, just popping my head round the door to check on Garry Taylor, who is here on episode 7. Hi, Garry.
Hello, Wayne. Nice to see you again. How the devil are you?
I'm very well, thanks. It's nice to be back here in the salubrious surroundings of the Aston Martin Heritage Trust podcast. I see you've cleaned the leather specially for me.
Oh, I have. During the winter period, we've got the leather wipe out, so I hope you're impressed.
It's very nice. I'm very impressed, as I am here. And of course, if you haven't checked out the Aston Martin Heritage Trust, you really must do. You can find all the details you need on the Aston Martin Heritage Podcast page, where you can find all of the previous episodes of this podcast as well. Links to the Heritage Trust site are on there, and there is a new website in the offing, which is all very exciting. And of course, details and information on everything we're talking about in this podcast. And it's been exciting times for Aston Martin themselves, actually, because here we are, January 2023, and big news out of Gaydon that there are loads of new jobs going at Aston Martin. In fact, it's increasing its employment at its Gaydon headquarters, so much so that they're creating 100 new jobs at their manufacturing facility. And it's all in preparation for them unleashing a new generation of sports cars. So positive times for Aston Martin, Garry.
I think you're right, and it was great news, and it seemed to come out of the blue. And let's not be shy, Wayne. I think Aston Martin has had a troubled history in recent years. I mean, I think anyone would say that finances haven't been too rosy, and hopefully it's coming back together. So to receive this news that they are creating jobs, of that size, I think it was magnificent news. And I think this shows confidence from the board in the Aston Martin product, the brand, the facilities, because they wouldn't be, forking out for 100 new employees if they were bunkering down. I think they really are committed to Aston Martin and to power their way through this turmoil they seem to be going through, and best of luck. I think it's great news. It was pleasant surprise.
Well, one of the nice things is that they're saying that it's going to offer full-time permanent employment to some of their agency staff that they've been relying on in recent months, especially working at Aston Martin sites like those at St Athan, who have successfully launched the DBX 707 last year, of course. So nice to see that although there was a lot of temporary staff and a lot of flux in Aston Martin for a little time there as that new model came on stream, they're actually taking those people in-house. And it makes a lot of sense. You don't have to then go out and recruit and retrain people. They've got knowledge and experience within the brand already. And it's good news because, of course, Garry, this year, big year for the Aston Martin Heritage Trust, because you're 25 years at the same time that Aston Martin Lagonda themselves are celebrating 110 years. So there's going to be a lot of champagne consumed this year.
Oh, I would hope so. But knowing the trustees of the Aston Martin Heritage Trust, it won't be champagne. It'll be prosecco. But I'm the treasurer, so I may sneak in the odd bottle of champagne every now and again. But yes, 25 years, 2023. We were born on from the 5th of August 1998, spun off from the Aston Martin Owners Club to protect the assets, mainly the Ulster and some of the archive collection at that time. And we have just grown and grown since then. We have a massive archive. We have a massive collection. We have about 25 cars now. Unfortunately, the museum, it's a lovely barn, a medieval barn, but we can only hold about 7 cars in there any one time, so in store outside. But the great news is, Wayne, is that our trustees meeting back in November is that we have committed to move out of the current premises within 6 years. There's always been an aspiration to move, but we have now committed to do so. So within 6 years, we hopefully have a shiny new premises to champion, to display the cars, the collection, the archive, the trophies, so much stuff as well. So this is very exciting for our 25th year, and plans are afoot. Now, 25 years, we know when we were born on the 5th of August. But as you say, Aston Martin 110 years. But some do say, is it actually 110 years, Wayne? I think we've had this argument because we're both MG enthusiasts, and it's MG's 100 years this year. But let's just pedal back to Aston Martin. So they're saying Aston Martin 110 years, 1913. Now, some may say that is not necessarily true. Now, Aston Martin were formed from Bamford and Martin Limited, and yes, that was formed in 1913. But the name Aston Martin didn't appear till later, about 1 or 2 years later. So there is a little bit of discussion there on is it actually 110 years? But we had a centenary back in 10 years ago, so that's where we are. Aston Martin were formed from Bamford and Martin in 1913, so that's what we're staying with. But as I say, Wayne, going back over 100, 110 years, MG have the same problem. It's their centenary this year. It's their 100 years this year. But some are saying that's not true. Some are saying it's in 24, 25. I think that's the case, isn't it, Wayne?
Yeah, that's right. In MG circles, there's a bit of a discussion over whether old number 1, which currently sits at the British Motor Museum at Gaydon, is the first MG, or whether it isn't, because although it was Cecil Kimber's Special Morris that was designed to take on the Exeter and Land's End trials of that year, in fact, it wasn't badged MG. In fact, the MG didn't come along till later in that decade. And of course, modern manufacturers, they need to make sure that they recognise the beginnings of their actual company, the company that they now have. And so you'll see this with Jaguar, for example. Strictly, it was Jaguar's centenary last year because Swallow sidecars that William Walmsley and William Lyons began together was the beginnings of what became Jaguar after the Second World War. It was just a name change, really. But of course, Jaguar cars have to recognise 1939 because that was when Jaguar Cars Limited started. So all of these funny little grey areas occur in history, and it's here with Aston Martin as well. You go back to 1912, and Lionel Martin and Robert Bamford were, of course, car salesmen, and they had a sales room selling brand new Singers at the time. They were actually a dealership for Singer. So things come out of evolution. Businesses don't just turn on like a light bulb. They sort of evolve over time, and that's what we now have to unravel 100, 110 years later when we're looking back in history. But I think we're going to have a lot of centenaries to come over the next decade or so, because of course the 1920s was the heyday for especially the British motor industry and the gaining of traction, I guess, if you pardon the pun, of the motor car around the world. So a lot of companies started in the 1920s. A lot of companies didn't survive the 1930s that followed, but we'll see a lot of centenaries over the next 10 years, I imagine.
Just going back to the origins of Aston Martin, I think what has been established was that Bamford and Martin Limited was established in 1913, and they built their first car, the Coal Scuttle, unusual name, but there we are, in 1914, and registered that as an Aston Martin in March 1915. And then it successfully appeared at Brooklands track, and I think there's a picture on Facebook and other places when we posted the congratulations, happy birthday, Aston Martin, a picture of Coal Scuttle itself at Brooklands in 1921. So that's what we're playing with. That's what we're acting on. And if you have any opinions that the birthday of 110 years is wrong, then please go to the Aston Martin Heritage Podcast website and you just put your comments there. And
do be patient. There may be some time to reply because Gary will be popping open the champagne by then. So
Prosecco.
Oh, Prosecco. Oh, okay. Pardon me. Yes. A year of celebration for Aston Martin ahead, and of course then a year of celebration for the Aston Martin Heritage Trust, celebrating quarter of a century looking after the heritage of this great brand that we all know and love. And the great brand continues because, of course, it's kind of the V12 swan song this year, the launch of the new DBS 770 Ultimate in 2023. Production's going to be limited to just under 500 models, I think, and
all sold out.
All gone. Not a surprise.
Sorry, Wayne, you've had it, mate.
That's it. Well, I'll have to wait for the next one to come along, but unfortunately, it looks like the next one will be, what do we reckon, Gary? All electric?
I think so. I think this is part of the Aston Martin have said for their birthday celebrations this year, they're going to be showcasing some new models. I guess there'll be concepts, and there will be there's some around the world, but certainly will be something at the Goodwood Festival Speed this year. So I think we are looking towards electrification now. I think this is the next the next step. But Wayne, I've read in Autocar and other places that the V12, it has a very special connection with Aston Martin and with enthusiasts. And Aston Martin still haven't ruled it out, for the future. It may come back in various forms. Don't forget, not all around the world is going electric. There are markets, huge markets, where perhaps they are a bit more flexible for the internal combustion, and we may see the V12 appear in special forms for other markets, not necessarily for Europe and UK, but elsewhere around the world. On synthetic fuel, I don't know, but I don't think it's been 100% dismissed, the internal combustion V12. It will be a shame to see it go, but environmental pressures and I totally understand those. I think we are looking towards the electric future from now on. And what a way to sign off V12, DBS 770 Ultimate, and what a cracking looking car that is.
Well, it's going to be available in coupe and Volante form, of course. 300 coupes, 199 Volantes, and listen to this, 5.2 litre V12, 770 PS of power at 6.5 RPM, and a whopping 900 Newton meters of torque. Whoa. Wow. Which is going to throw it up the road at 211 miles per hour, they reckon. And while you sit there and listen, no doubt, to that amazing 5.2 litre V12 singing along. So anytime you want to take me for a ride in yours, Garry, I'm there. I'm ready.
Okay, fine. I'm unfortunately I am one of the number of lucky customers to have the car come in my way, and I am also lying. So if Aston Martin are listening, and I know they are avid listeners, if you feel that you would like to lend a DBS 770 to the Aston Martin Heritage Trust, well, I'm sure we can fit you in.
Absolutely. It'd be lovely to see that car down at the Aston Martin Heritage Trust and, maybe wheel it next to the Ulster and see how far they've come in all of those years. But car collections are of what we're about to speak here on the Aston Martin Heritage Trust podcast, because you've been inspecting an amazing one, Garry, in Hatfield, just outside of North London there, a company that is celebrating 3 decades in the motor trade, and a company that has a phenomenal facility. We're, of course, talking of Nicholas Mee. And, Garry, you went to meet Nicholas, didn't you? And have a look round his collection and have a poke round his farm. Oh,
I did. It was a couple of weeks ago. Had an invite to go and see Nick Mee at Nicholas Mee & Co. at Hatfield. Now, I think it's been at that premises for a while now, but I haven't been there. And my goodness, Wayne, what a beautiful site. Huge site, some refurbished, renovated, or even new build farms, which look very ancient, but new build construction. And it's if you're an Aston Martin enthusiast, you would just be dribbling all over the cars. I don't think he would appreciate that somehow or the other, but the cars are so well presented in the barns with the workshop facilities, the after sales, and they do most of the work on site now. It really is a lovely place. So, as you said, 3 decades, 30 years of memorable car sales from Nick Mee. And now I've known Nick for many years when I was a youth going into London and walking down Sloane Street, and there was an Aston Martin dealership there, poking my nose at the window, putting my nose against the window, my fingerprints on the glass, which I'm sure wasn't really appreciated, and seeing the beautiful V8s, and I was thinking, oh, one day, Garry, one day. And so Nick Mee effectively, I say, started from there in Aston Martin, but he goes back further than that, his car sales history. And so when I was with Nick, we discussed his history of cars, his family, his interest in cars, how he started, how he got involved in Aston Martin, through selling the cars, his views on the Newport Pagnell V8s, the Lagondas. Spoke about Victor Gauntlet, the great Victor Gauntlet at the time, his leadership style, and how he moved from Aston Martin Sloane Street to Chauvel Place to other areas in London to ultimately, I think, this most wonderful facility. great stories. Nick is a great raconteur. He has a great number of stories and anecdotes from that period through the 70s and 80s to current days, up until effectively the Ford takeover, which he had an opinion on. And so I like to think it's a lovely podcast. So we press record and we'll let Nick me go, and we hope you enjoy it.
Excellent. I met him when I was recording podcasts for Top Gear Live back in the day when we used to run the MPH show, and he was good then. I imagine he'll be just as good now. So let's go and have a look at Nicholas Me with Garry Taylor's interview next.
Immerse yourself in the rich heritage of Aston Martin. The cars, the people, the history. The Aston Martin Heritage Podcast.
Nick, thank you very much for joining us on the Aston Martin Heritage Trust podcast. I'm delighted that you're here.
Well, Garry, it's a pleasure to see you here, and thanks for making the journey. I've got to firstly say how much I admire you for the work you're putting into the Heritage Trust, which is something I'm wholly supportive of, and I think it's a great, I don't know whether the word is institution or...
Some suggest we should be in an institution.
Yes, I've heard that before. But yeah, no, I think the work that you guys do in the Trust is great, and so I'm more than happy to do this podcast, and I'm all for it.
Thank you very much, Nick. That's very kind of you. Now, Aston Martin enthusiasts will probably know, looking on Aston Martin social media, and if you subscribe to Nick Me Full Bore newsletter, we're currently in 30 years of trading. Isn't that right, Nick?
Yeah, indeed. Well, it's 30 years since we formed or incorporated the company. Those that know me will know that I've been attached and in the Aston Martin brand since 1976, actually, when the company Aston Martin had just come out of some difficult times and receivership. And I joined the company in London on the sales side. And for whatever reason... and there are several of them, I've remained involved in it ever since.
Nick, before we get into your Aston Martin history, if I may, I'd like to go back to the beginning, back to your youth. Were there cars in your family? Was there a car history in your family? Was there an enthusiasm for that?
Yeah, well, it seems to have been inbred. I mean, I first, I was one of those children in the back of my mother's Triumph Herald that used to swivel around looking at every car and identifying it and saying, yeah, that one's a Standard and that one's a Ford and that one's a Vauxhall. So I suppose there's that. But also my great-grandfather, and this is a coincidence, was and apprenticed in London at the turn of the last century as a wheelwright and coachmaker. And he formed a business, funnily enough, in Hatfield, J. Gray and Sons, and they used to repair and maintain and build coaches and supply, funnily enough, Lord Salisbury, who owns the estate we're on and talking now from. And that business progressed from there through being associated with the RAC and the AA in the early days of motoring and maintaining cars, through to the 1970s, when J. Grays were BMC agents and dealers in Hatfield. So there is something in the blood that goes back to those days from my great-grandfather on my mother's side.
I can understand it being in the family, but the children don't necessarily want to follow on from that. So, in your education, did you always want to be involved in cars, or did you aspire to be a chartered accountant, line tamer, or any of those things?
Well, firstly, education-wise, I was fortunate or unfortunate enough, depending on your view, to go to a boarding school. And I really didn't like school, and I didn't get on with being at school, and school didn't get on with me. So when it came to an age when I could leave school, I just left school. Didn't want to do further education. And... what age did you leave school? 17, and not knowing what I wanted to do, my mother sent me off to one of these vocational guidance counsellors who basically said, go to college or do something you like doing. And I liked cars, so I found employment with a company called Henleys of Hendon. Henleys at the time were the largest Jaguar dealers in the world, and I enrolled in something called the sales training program, which was interesting in so much as there was no sales training. But there was an awful lot of being a fitter's mate and learning about service reception and parts. And all those things that have actually stood me in good stead over the years in a grounding of the industry. That's where it started.
So starting with Jaguar, so I think we've the Aston Martin orbit have always associated with you with Aston Martin. So you started with Jaguar. Were you involved in other marques before you actually got through to Aston Martin? I will be intrigued how you got into Aston Martin. What about up to that point? What marques were you involved with it?
Yeah, okay. So, I did just under 2 years with Henleys on the Jaguar side, but literally I'm talking about on the shop floor in a set of overalls, bashing exhaust systems and changing oils and God knows what else. I then took a job, a friend of mine who I'd met at Henleys had taken a job at AFN in Isleworth. AFN were Porsche Cars GB at the time, down in the Falcon Works in Isleworth. But a job came up there, which I took. So I did that for about a year, which probably takes me up to being sort of 19 or something like that. And very shortly after that, I actually went and lived in the States for 18 months, where, for a period of time over there, I did take a job trying to sell cars off a used car lot for Bill Seidel's Datsun. But that was actually at the tail end of the fuel crisis, and the used car lot was full of Cadillacs and Buicks and gas guzzlers. You couldn't sell them for love nor money. But they gave me a car and a bit of money.
So this was about 1973, was it?
Correct, yeah. So I was there in the States, 73, 74, came back to the UK in 75, again, not knowing what I was going to do, but there was an opening I think it was an advertisement in the Telegraph for HRO in South Kensington, wanted a junior salesperson. I had an interview. I told the man who was interviewing me, who was a man called John Leppard, who was quite a character and MD of HRON at the time, and I told him I'd been selling cars on a used car forecourt in Florida, which impressed him. I didn't tell him I hadn't sold any, and he offered me a job, and so I started at HRON in South Kensington, a showroom which is still there today, although it's Lamborghini, and we had franchises there were Ferrari, Rolls, Bentley, Rover and Jaguar. So that's where I really started to sell cars, and at that time worked under a guy called Tony Nugent. Nugent had been I think what you would call the brand manager at HROs for Aston Martin, but of course then when Aston went out of business, that stopped for him. When Aston started again, they recruited him in 1976, in January 76, to open a company called Aston Martin Sales in 33 Sloane Street, London. And I'd been working under Tony, who's affectionately known in the day as Huge Nuge. And I was living, funnily enough, at the time in Knightsbridge, so I was walking past the showroom, which Aston had taken in Sloane Street, every day, and I used to pop in and say hello. And then one day he said, come and sit down, and we had a chat, and he said, would you come and work selling Astons? And so I was quite flattered by that. And then when he offered me double the salary I was earning at HROs, it was a bit of a no-brainer.
So I think you say Aston went out of business. I'm just trying to think which one of times Aston went out of business. So that was probably about 74, was it?
It was 74 to 76. That's the only time that it actually ceased to exist.
And I think that was the time when famously children were sending some pocket money to Aston Martin to save the business.
Yeah, absolutely. It was it was one of those, quite interestingly, when Aston was going out of business and under William Wilson, they had applied to the then Trade and Industry Secretary for a grant or loan. It was troubled times in the UK at the time. So they'd gone to the government for a bailout, and the Trade and Industry Secretary was a man called Anthony Wedgwood Benn.
Yes, I seem to remember that one.
Yeah, so you can understand why he said no, because I can't imagine he could think of a single reason to save Aston Martin, a luxury brand. But the company was saved in that period, 74, 76, by a consortia, really, that was headed by Peter Sprague, Alan Curtis, Dennis Flather and George Minden. They'd bought the company, and production had started again by January 1976, and in March 76 I started at Aston Martin Sales selling cars under Nugent, and we had Belinda Berry was our secretary there, and George Press, who was our caretaker, and that was it.
So Aston Martin Sales in Sloane Street, was that part of HR Owen or Aston Martin?
No, it was wholly owned by Aston Martin. That was so that's where I first got into Aston, and I have got to say, at the time, I mean, I'd been selling Ferraris and Rolls and Bentleys, and I think I'd probably only driven 2 or 3 Astons, so it was still a bit of a mystery to me. But listen, I was 20-something or another, and someone doubled my salary, so I learnt fast.
So it doubled your salary. You suddenly fell in love with Aston Martins. What were Aston Martins like at that time to compare to some of the other cars you were selling? Was it were you pleasantly surprised or a bit worried?
Interesting question. So the first time I drove a V8, I was a little concerned, because here I was in a car which actually, what was it? It was a new thing altogether, and the V8's quite a motor car to drive, particularly out of the West End. But after 2 or 3 drives and spirited drives, I began to learn the performance, availability, and the comfort, and I really began to get into the V8 as actually what it is, which is a very, very good consummate all-rounder.
So Aston Martin had just gone back into production. Was it after the recession had finished, or we were just getting out of recession? We had a new dealership in Sloane Street. Relatively easy selling the cars?
No, not at all, because so Aston Martins are not cheap, we know that, and selling those cars in those days was difficult, because firstly, the V8 was no longer new; it was an older car. And
when did the V8 come out? I was just trying to think. It came out in...
No. The V8 first came out as the DBS V8. Which gained itself a reputation for being unreliable. And then the carburetor V8 came out back in 73, 74 model year, which did sort out a lot of issues. But it was kind of too late. There were all sorts of issues that have been going on in Aston Martin, the sale of land to prop it up and so on. But William Wilson ran out of money, and there wasn't any money coming from the government. It went out of business. The consortium I've just mentioned stepped in, production kicked off again, and we had to get cars sold. But that was 76, so the car was already 6-7 years old. So it was a 6-7 year old car, which had the reputation of being an unreliable car, going back to the DBS V8, and also had just come out of a company which had gone out of business. So, you're saying to people, spend a lot of money on this motor car, and if you do, we'll stay in business, and if you don't, we probably won't. So it was a push. It was a push. I
can certainly understand that. And I think we're talking 1976, 77 now. The V8s were a struggle, but they did sell. But there was a saviour in Lagonda, I believe.
Quite definitely. So Lagonda, which was, I can't remember, was it 77 Motor Show?
I can't remember. I always remember the front cover of Motor Magazine, the show special of the Lagonda.
Well, it was front cover. I think it was front cover, or certainly inside front cover, in the Telegraph. Yeah. It was massive. It was radical. It was how can I put it? Billed as this future car with electronic instrumentation, lots of advances, and what it really did was it put Aston Martin back on the map in the public's eye as a company that was back in business. So suddenly, there was new product. Oh, they must be back in business. Oh, it's a future car. Yeah, I was on the show stand on the launch for the duration of the show. It was 10 days, hard work in those days. But people were flocking to see it. I mean, it was the star of the show. We were taking orders during the show, and I've often joked about it, but people did essentially queue to order these cars. So it did the trick, very important. Of course, that car didn't work, and it was another 3 or 4 years before they hit the road. Lots of conversations about when am I going to get my car. But yeah, a vital car. And in fact, if Aston's hadn't had the Lagonda, there's no way that company would have got past the back end of 1980, beginning of 81.
Do you feel that, I've always been intrigued by this question, the car that saved Aston Martin, because Aston Martin, were any niche car manufacturer, they can't really afford to have a car that fails. But do you feel, in particularly, the Lagonda saved Aston Martin?
Oh, categorically, yeah. I mean, just if you think about it, that, you know, having a new product that put the car back in the public eye, but also the numbers of orders and deposits that came with it were very useful at the time. And yes, there's no doubt about it. It introduced Aston Martin to markets in the Middle East, the Far East. It reinvigorated Aston Martin in the United States. This was a car, it's very expensive, and it was not for everybody, but it was for people who were very wealthy, for sheikhs and for kings and queens and presidents.
I seem to remember that I think it was that the price had doubled from the time of announcement to launch, or something like that.
A consequence of inflation.
We've had this discussion before the podcast, and I'm not going into that now. Who were buying the Lagondas? Who were buying Aston Martins at this time? I think the Lagondas just opened up a whole new market around the world, didn't it?
Oh, categorically. I mean, you know, it was sheikhs from the Middle East. It was presidents, prime ministers, captains of industry. I remember, you know, one particular guy in England who owned a football club, and you know, this was people who were very wealthy and almost felt privileged at the time to be able to get one of these cars. They were scarce. I mean, by definition, we know with a hand-built car that's low volume, and for 3-4 years, other than, you know, once production had started, it was the hot ticket to have. You know, we were doing stretch ones, Tickford-bodied ones, boomerang aerials on the boot with TVs and hi-fis and telephones and custom build stuff. It was really very exciting. You know, Lagonda undoubtedly saved Aston Martin, because if it had just been the V8, as I say, it wouldn't have got past 1980. But fortunately also, and the Lagonda does sort of overshadow it a bit, you had the introduction in 1978 of the Volante and the Vantage models based on the V8, and they were both new models. Vantage, you know, giving a more extreme performance. In fact, it was tagged as Britain's first supercar. And the Volante, which actually the United States, they didn't want coupes. All they wanted was convertibles. So an awful lot were built and sold over in the States. A lot of them are now back in Europe. But yeah, just the rolling out of a model range and getting them out of the door saved the company. But the Lagonda was the one that bankrolled it, because there were substantial deposits with those cars.
I'm going to lead on to this later on the podcast, but Aston Martin sales were in Sloane Street. What was London good at that time? Was that a good environment to sell cars?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, London, before I finished at Aston in 1991, we actually had captured 60% of the UK destined product market. So 60% of new Astons sold in the UK were coming through the London office. This was actually a very similar figure to Jack Barclay's with Rolls-Royce and Bentley at the time, because people used to like to come to London and spend the weekend and buy their car, or come and have business meetings, buy their car and take their colleagues and friends and make an occasion of it. So Rolls and Bentleys out of Berkeley Square did very well. We did quite well out of Sloane Street. But it's changed dramatically since then with the, the anti-car movement in London at the moment, and which never seems to be going away. So, we built up Aston Martin sales as a business very nicely, and we were doing not just new car sales, but we were doing used car sales with the cars prepared up at Aston Martin service in Newport Pagnell. And we were doing export sales. That was quite important too. So in those days, people from overseas could come to the UK. We could take them up to Newport Pagnell, I often did, show them around, show them how the cars were built, and discuss their requirements, take an order, and they'd come back in 6 months' time, pick their car up on a personal export scheme they could keep it in the UK registered for up to 12 months, and then either pay taxes on it or remove it from the country. Very useful, and I'm not sure you can do it today. But yeah, personal exports, new, used and new UK destined product was the game.
I'm going to ask you a question that's going to make me weep, and probably the listeners as well. I mean, obviously you said you sold used Aston Martins, so we're talking 1975, 76, so presumably the used ones would have been DB4s, DB5s. And how much would they have been going for then?
Well, yeah, not actually, funnily enough, not so many. The used car business we built up was in the V8s, more than anything. Occasionally we'd have a 6 Mark II or a 6 Volante or something in DB5s, but it wasn't the thrust of the business. V8s was it, and part of the reason in doing that was that it gave us the ability to underpin the values of the used cars, which helped sell the new cars. People won't buy a new, very expensive car if they see massive depreciation in the marketplace. So us being involved in the late, low mileage used V8s and keeping the prices up to a sensible level meant people could feel more comfortable buying new cars. It worked because of the low volume.
What was the waiting list then for a new Aston Martin?
In the 70s, late 70s, early 80s, there wasn't a waiting list. I mean, we might have said there was a waiting list, but there wasn't one. Right. In fact, when the model changed from the Oscar India came out at the back, for 1979 model year, and we had quite a few of the pre-Oscar India V8s to sell at that point, and I was going up and down the country visiting people's offices who had expressed an interest in an Aston Martin. I was sitting down in their office, having checked out what the colour car that they had in their director's parking spot, was it white, blue, silver or whatever, and they were talking about placing an order for a new car, and we'd have that discussion and we'd get to the point of saying, okay, well, you can have a new car, but it's going to cost you, whenever it comes through in 6 months' time, the manufacturer's list price on the date of delivery. So we can't fix the cost now, it's whatever it's going to be in 6 months. And but actually, well, if you want a blue one, because you've got a blue one in your parking spot.
Oh, yes, I do.
Yeah, we might have a cancelled order, and so we'd get these cars out of the door. So there's always an element of creating the illusion of a waiting list for any manufacturer, I'm sure. But in those days, there was no waiting list. That came, funny enough, from the mid-80s onwards.
I'm intrigued by Oscar India, and I'm going to say something to you because you said something to me about Aston Martin interiors many years ago, and you won't remember this. Now, I think it was when Oscar India, I think there was a spec change in the car, but they became more luxurious. There was walnut, there was more leather.
Yeah. So Oscar India was, how can I put it? It's all part of the process of elevating the position of the car in the marketplace and its perceived position. For the 1979 model year, it was the first updates on a shape that had been introduced in 1973. So the bonnet was changed, the rear wing profile changed, given a little lip at the back and an aerodynamic element. This is when aero was coming into importance in car design. And the interior was luxified, for want of a better expression. Up until then, all the dashboards had been covered in black vinyl with black instruments and black switches, and it was all a bit sort of British and 70s. And so just doing the dashboards in interior colour leather and putting some very nicely done mirrored burr walnut finishes on the doors and across the dashboard, and changing the centre console lifted the whole interior, leather head linings. And so suddenly we had a car which could be considered as an alternative for a Bentley or I don't know, any one of a number of cars. It lifted the perception of the car in many respects. Mechanically, pretty much the same. But this is what manufacturers will always do. It's an uplift and an upgrade midway through a model life. it was just a very long model life.
Yes, indeed. I remember, I think it was at a time, because the last of the, shall we say, luxurified Astons were probably the DB7, if you like, if you're talking wood and leather. And then we had the Gaydon cars come out on the VH platform. And I do remember you saying to me, it says, if Aston Martin, of course, then the wood and the leather of that luxurious nature had gone, if you like. And you said to me, Gary, if Aston Martin still produced cars, or shall we say a gentleman's library, it would still sell. Do you remember saying that?
Yeah, no, I've always maintained. I mean, I understand the whole Gaydon era cars, and it has introduced a raft of new people into the Aston Martin brand. A different client, if you like. But there are plenty of people that have had the wood and leather interior cars that looked at the modern Gaydon era motor cars and it didn't appeal to them. So to some degree, they've left those people behind, and those people have gone to Bentley. And after all, you can go and buy a new Bentley Continental GT and it's got acres of leather and wood, and it makes people feel comfortable. The thing about wood, love or hate it, not everyone loves it, it is dateless. It doesn't, it's just like sort of there, and it's nice and it's comfortable, and it doesn't date. It just is like a library. It's like comfortable. It's like going to sitting in a big armchair in the RAC club, or, So there's something to be said for that, and I've been on record with one or two people saying, even at Gaydon, that you should be producing a car with a more generous seating in the rear, and with a slightly more traditional interior, to win back some of those clients that were hard won in the old days of the 70s and 80s, and give them a car that actually they want. Go to head with Bentley and their Continental GT. And they've done rather well with it, haven't they?
Can we move on to Victor Gauntlet? Because I believe you. So Victor Gauntlet came in. When did he and Peter Levinos have a controlling interest in Aston Martin? Do you recall the time?
Yeah, absolutely. So through the very early 80s, 81, 82, we talked about it being saved by Lagonda, but also by other investors that came in and out. People like Peter Cadbury of the chocolate fame and so on. And at that time, I had, as a client in Sloane Street, Victor Gauntlet. In fact, I'd sold him 2 Ferraris and tried to sell him a V8 Volante. There's a very famous story about one particular Ferrari, which I won't go into now. He was a client, and he became acquainted with Alan Curtis, who got him in. At the time, Victor had a company called Pace Petroleum.
That was based in Farnham, wasn't it?
Yeah, very successful petroleum retailers with outlets up and down the country. And so getting involved in Astons for him at that point was, I won't say a drop in the ocean, but it wasn't it wasn't major. But what he brought to the business, apart from some cash, was a tremendous amount of enthusiasm and a motivation to people inside the business. And so that was earlier in the 80s, and within a year or two, through the association of motorsport, partly with Nimrod and so on, and through the love of collecting cars, he struck up a relationship with Peter Levinos, who then, I think it was in 1984, with the backing of Ceres, which is the Levinos shipping empire, bought in to Aston Martin, and it was very much a Gauntlet Levinos show from then onwards until the Ford acquisition of 75% in 1987. The Levinos funding gave the company quite a lot of stability, and Victor gave it direction.
I met Victor Gauntlet once, and it was an amazing experience. But obviously, you met him quite a few times. What was he like as a person, as a character, as a mentor? What was your memories of him?
Well, I don't want to demystify the guy, but so Victor was very kind to me, very good to me, and he was a mentor for me. I used to probably see him once a week and speak to him several times a week. He was a man who would look at a problem, and he would form a strategy for a solution and follow it through, and it was well thought out. He was good at strategy, basically, and good at execution, good at motivating people, and a team of people around him who were all very faithful and would go to the ends of the earth to back up his decisions and make things work. I mean, it was an extraordinary time, actually, and I don't think I've ever really met anyone quite as charismatic in so many ways, and amusing and generous, not just in buying dinners or whatever, but generous in spirit. Marvellous guy.
Excellent. Were you still at Sloane Street then, or had you moved? Because I think you had moved elsewhere in London at that time.
Yeah, so the Sloane Street situation came to a bit of a head in 1984. The then landlords of the showroom there wanted to increase the rent from £50,000 a year to something just under £150,000 a year. And it sort of coincided, funnily enough, with a time when we were starting to make some proper money. And it just felt awful to think that we were going to stay there and all the money that we were going to make was going to disappear into the Mothercare Pension Fund or Prudential or whoever it was that owned us at the time, or owned that building. And it coincided with Yves Saint Laurent, who were looking for new premises in the West End, approaching Aston said to us, and saying, would we like to give up the showroom? We had another 10 years in the lease. And Victor negotiated a fantastic deal for the remaining 10 years. We took the money, and coincidentally, again, extraordinary coincidence that happened, I received some details from a guy called John Gote of a premises in Knightsbridge, in Cheval Place, which had been a Rolls and a Rolls-Royce specialist and Renault dealership, tucked away, bit run down, but it was a freehold position, and we just looked at it and said, it's round the corner, there's no passing trade, but does it really matter? It's a blank canvas, we can make a wonderful showroom, and there'll be some change from what we get out of Yves Saint Laurent. So we did that deal and created a fabulous showroom in Cheval Place. I was very fortunate and to be given a lot of responsibility for the development of that.
What were you at Cheval Place? What was your title?
At that time, I'd taken over the running of Aston Martin sales in London. Tony Nugent had retired, and in fact, when I was given that role of managing it, my first task was to make 2 people redundant. There was a bit of that was a typical Victor thing. You're going to get this job now, but the first thing you've got to do is make 2 people redundant. Thanks. So anyway, I ran Aston Martin sales and reported directly to Victor, which was great. And that carried on until I left the company in 1991.
I certainly remember that Cheval Place. I had some clients in London. There was a property company, and it was very near there. And I never had any excuse not to go to London, because every time I went to see a client there, I would always pop to the showroom. And as you say, it was tucked out of the way. He didn't know where it was, but I found it, and it was always a joy to go there.
Yeah. Well, the one thing, it's a bit like where we are now up in Essendon. Location's not that important, because after all, how many people walking past the showroom are going to nip in and buy an Aston? Do you need to be on a high street? But what's more important is that the location is a nice location.
While you were there, and I must admit, I did pick this up on, and dear listeners, do go onto the Nicholas Me website, where you will see some videos there of Nick's 30 years being interviewed by Steve Wakefield, who is the editor of the Aston magazine. And yes, I did have a look through it, and I do remember the V8 Zagato coming up there. And yes, we haven't got a video. And Nick has just smiled. Now, I remember this V8 Zagato, and it was very much sold on a sketch, wasn't it?
Yeah. So the initial concepts of V8 Zagato were drawings,
And the drawings and the sketch was very impressive. It was a lovely looking thing.
Yeah, well, the original concept was going to have a dry sumped engine, and it was going to be fuel injected, so the bonnet was flat and it could be lower and sleeker and so on. The reality was that didn't happen in the end. But yeah, the original project was announced with a very skinny little pamphlet and some drawings and sketches coloured in and a press release. But actually, very quickly, there was a scale model, a wind tunnel scale model produced for that car, which I went to Italy to collect one weekend and fly back with it. Sat with me in first class on the seat next to me.
Hang on, you had the V8 Zagato model first class next to you on the flight back.
Yes, Alitalia.
Different times, dear listener, different times.
Well, it was. I had to go and speak to them at the desk, and I said, look, there's no way this is going in the hold. So they let me carry it on. So yeah, I brought it back to England, and 2 weeks later we had a launch. Funnily enough, it's still in Sloane Street. We blacked out all the showroom windows so that people couldn't see what was going on inside, and we had a bit of catering and lighting and invited clients to come and see this scale model, and which was quite interesting. I remember one particular client looking at it and for the first time and saying, I'm not quite sure whether I can say it's a podcast anyway. He said, it's a stubby little and I went, yeah, it is, isn't it? You know, because it was not quite what the drawing was, but it did look good. And yeah, as it turned out, it was quite a successful car. Great to drive.
As you say, I think when you see the model, actually when you saw the final production version from the original sketch, it was probably challenging. There was a difference. Did some of the deposit holders say no, or did most commit to it?
Interesting that. I've got to say, I do not remember a single person who had committed to a Zagato once they'd seen the scale model and then the full-size car, subsequently cancelling the order. No, I don't remember that at all. Right. You know, we were promising a car that was delivered, you know, 10% lighter, more aerodynamic efficient. The whole V8 genre as a vehicle was always hampered. I mean, it's a fantastic engine, hampered by carrying a heavy car. So take 10% of the weight out of it and make it more aerodynamically efficient, and you've got a performance car, and that's what the car was. I mean, in the day, the V8 Vantage Zagato was road tested by magazines alongside 288 GTOs and 959 Porsches, both of which had a way more technically advanced car than the Zagato, but the Zagato kept up. I mean, it wasn't a slow car. And that was by weight reduction and aerodynamics. So that's what people were wanting. That was what they were buying into, and that's what they got. There were some objections to the bulge on the bonnet, but
there was probably more from the motoring journalists who were probably more surprised than, as you say, probably more than the customers.
You're probably right, but the journalists weren't buying the cars.
You left Cheval Place, I think you referred to earlier, in 1991.
Yeah, we were. All these cycles, economic cycles that go on. At the end of 1990, beginning of 91, we were going through what was actually thought of and termed at the time as the first global recession, and things were getting very difficult. We had a massive order bank of the Virage car, which had started to come through at the beginning of 1990, and arguably you could say that the Virage went into production before it should have done. It wasn't as good as it could have been on day one. We were delivering cars to people that had to go into production then because all the legislation had run out on the old V8s, and we were delivering cars to people that weren't particularly good as the economy's sinking, and lots of people were trying to get out of their commitments to buy this motor car, as they were with Jaguar XJ 220s.
I remember the 220 having a particular problem there.
It was a very difficult time through 1991, and towards the end of it, Victor resigned from the company and relinquished his chairmanship, etc. And at the time, funnily enough, there had been going on in Aston Martin something called a voluntary redundancy program, And I thought about this for a moment or two. I mean, I was fairly newly married and had 2 children and so on. But I thought about this for a little while, thinking, do you know what? I'm not sure. It was obvious Ford were going to take over.
How long you were there at that time? How long you were with Aston Martin?
16 years. But I'd had all sorts of meetings with some very senior people in Ford strategy people, Ford management people, and I had a fair idea how that company was going to be run thereafter. And I thought, Ford don't retail cars. They don't, they wholesale cars. They don't understand retail businesses. And so I was having to explain how the business worked. And I could see that they were going to come back at me with a whole bunch of manuals in ring binders, and this is how you're going to do it from now on. And I thought, I do not want to do this. So I put my hat in the ring for the voluntary redundancy, which took a few people aback in Aston. But anyway, it didn't, funnily enough, happen, because Walter Hayes, lovely chap though he was, wrote me a charming letter saying we make jobs redundant, not people, and the job's not redundant. But my heart had gone by that point, and I left the company and started trading for myself.
Did you know what you was going to do when you left? Did you say, right, I'm going to specialise in Aston Martins or any cars in different?
Well, the thing is, Garry, what I knew by then is I'd been quite successfully, or marginally successfully, selling motor cars for almost 20 years, 17, 18 years. And I knew I thought I knew what I was doing, and I thought I could make a living doing it for myself. Do I want to go through... Look, I'd been reporting directly to the chairman and chief executive officer of Aston Martin. Aston Martin was going to get owned by the Ford Motor Company. Walter Hayes, lovely man, very senior. Is he going to want to have me in his ear saying, should I pay this for that? What do you think that's worth? No. So there was going to be someone else inserted, and I thought, I don't need that. I can survive without and do my own thing. That's what I did, and I left, and quite funnily enough, the following week I got a phone call from Victor one day. He said, what are you doing? I said, well, I don't know at the moment, but I'm why? He said, well, do you want to come for lunch down in Farnham? Which I did. We had lunch, we sat down, he pulled out a sheet of paper with 30 cars on the list, and he said, what are you going to charge me to sell those? So we had a deal, and that was it. That's how the business started. That's how, as a sole trader.
As a sole trader.
Yeah, which I did for 18 months. Had a storage unit down in Hartley, Wintney, and I was travelling all the time from Fulham down to Cobham and Hartley, Wintney, and anyway. That was 18 months, and then I was offered the opportunity of taking a lease on a Muse property in South Kensington, a 9-car garage, which just that was going to take me back home. South Kent and Knightsbridge was my manor.
Oh, going back home, it's always comforting. So you were selling classic cars of a broad church, not just Aston Martin.
Yeah, there's always been the tendency to stick with the Aston Martin brand, but yes, in those early days, everything from E-types, D-types, Renault 4CVs, Bentleys, you name it, anything. And then even when we were in the Muse, we'd very often have what we used to rather laughingly term Chinese stock. So that's non-core, non-Aston stock. So everything, Jags, Porsches, NIS 240Zs, anything like that. But majoritively Aston is what I was known for, and a lot of the clients that I'd gained in my days from Aston Martin in Cheval Place and Sloane Street stuck with me, so it was great.
Was that during the classic car boom, or did the boom happen earlier? I can't remember.
No, the classic,
with the infamous first classic car boom and the infamous crash thereafter.
Yeah. So the boom in classic cars was really from 82, 83 right through to the end of 1990, and then it was a crash and burn, and classic cars didn't really gain much traction again till really the end of 90s. There was trade, but the values were pretty staid and static and so on. But yes, what happened through that period from the early 80s onwards, you started with one classic car magazine. I think it was called Thoroughbred and Classic Cars, Lionel Burrell. And then suddenly there's 2 classic car magazines, and then there's 3, and then there's auction houses springing up. Christie's getting more involved in the classic car scene. Bonham's getting more involved in the classic. Then there are professional restorers springing up, and people reproducing parts, and so the whole infrastructure of classic cars mushroomed through the 1980s, survived the 90s, and moved ahead in the noughties. So it's been an interesting thing to actually sit back and gauge how that's all happened. But it's a massive thing now. I mean, it's a lifestyle, and the classic car boom not been without its bust. But the great thing is, if you take a timeline and a money line and you stretch it over 30 years, classic cars have done extraordinarily well. But to get from A to B, they've been up and down, crossing that line several times. Values going down, values going up. But the interesting thing I was talking about the other day, I remember Daytonas in 1989, Ferrari Daytonas were £500,000, which is where they are today.
Is it the same?
But they have been more and they have been less.
Yeah.
It's extraordinary.
It's extraordinary, isn't it?
It's not necessarily the benchmark, but it's an interesting thought.
How long are you at South Kensington for?
So we had the Muse from 93 to 2000. So just 7 years. Interesting days. You were talking about Victor earlier on. In fact, part of that time, one of his sons was working for me. Peter Leonard Morgan, who had also been at H.R. Owens and then went to Lamborghini, was with me for a while as well. So it was an interesting period. And at the time, the Muse was still very car. So it was in that Muse, Gregor Fiskin, a guy called Chris Drake, who did competition cars and his classic cars, and Dan Margulis, who was famed and known for pre-war Alfa Romeos and pre-war cars as well. So there was quite a lot of activity. But through the 90s, it diminished. And now if you go into Queensgate Place Muse, there's only one trading company in there, which is Fiskin's. Coys were up the road, and various classic car businesses in South Kensington in the day. It's thinned out now.
So you moved to Shepherd's Bush?
After Queensgate Place Muse, yeah. We were offered the opportunity of a freehold of a garage, and I say garage, it was a 5,500 square foot sort of, I don't know what we could get in there, about 28 cars or something like that, opportunity, which was in Shepherd's Bush, Hammersmith. It was sort of where Hammersmith meets Shepherd's Bush meets Chiswick. It was just off the Goldhawk Road. And so we were able to buy the freehold of that. And funny enough, Victor came in with me on that, and another gentleman who's a very good client. We bought it jointly. And we equipped it, recruited 2 very good trained technicians, and we started a workshop in there, and we shared the space, sort of half sales, half service and maintenance, being able to bring preparation costs in-house, and meant we could control the costs and also the quality. So that was great. But as with any of these establishments, you soon find yourself running out of space. So we were looking at other opportunities by 2010, which we took. There was a showroom up on the Goldhawk Road which had previously been occupied by a company called Straight 8. It had been vacant for a couple of years, and we thought it would be a jolly good idea to take on some high street showrooms. There was some frontage and a rear showroom as well. We could put about 16 cars in there, and so we took a lease on that and spent quite a lot of money doing it all up. People remember it fondly, those that passed it. It was very much brand themed, and we were very lucky on the launch event to have Dr. Betts, Ulrich Betts, come and say a few kind words and help us open it with some other directors of Aston and Aston Martin Racing and clients, and we had a great evening actually. So at that point we had the workshops and the showrooms at 2 locations, and the showrooms was very helpful for us through from 2010 to 2018, and that is another boom period. So that was excellent, good timing, Not that we knew it at the time. It was a big risk. It was a big risk, and but yeah, that was great. But eventually, and particularly having sold my interest in the Wellesley Avenue, not business, but building, and taking a lease back, that lease was starting to expire, and we're beginning to think, crikey, what are we going to do for space? We're going to run out of space in a minute. So we had to think and have a deep dive on what we do on that, and which is why we ended up in Essendon, up here at Essendon Bury Farm, because it's a natural progression. London, it's kind of done with cars, really.
I think you're right, because this is what I referred to earlier when you was at Sloane Street. I asked you what was it like for selling cars, and you said it was great. You'd go there, it became an occasion, became an event, catch a show, do some shopping, buy a car. Yeah. But now, late 2010s, speed cameras, bumps.
Well, firstly, if you're a motorist with a motor car, you're not welcome in London. No. End of story. That's it. Yeah. So, we were finding ourselves battling when we were still in the Goldhall Road, and people would be ringing up and saying, oh, you've got this DV6 or DV whatever it is, and I'm interested in coming and see it. Where are you based? Or in London. Oh, really? Are you in the charging zone? Okay, all right. Well, London. Yeah, right. Okay. Well, I'll call you back. And some did, and some didn't, because people don't want to go to London anymore. And those that did, they probably made arrangements on the same day that they say they're going to come and see us, to see their Coots manager, or go to Harrods, or get their hair done, or go to Savile Row and have a suit. So they're doing 2 or 3 things on the same day. You can never get from A to B in London in 20 minutes, so forget that. And we would see them in the afternoon, and they'd be looking at their watch, going, oh, crikey, I want to get out of town before the traffic builds up. And you're trying to deal on a £250,000 motor car in 45 minutes. And if you'd said to the client, do you want to have a test drive in the car? Well,
yes, please, yes.
Yeah. You're in 20-mile-an-hour speed limits and speed bumps and cameras and buses and Uber drivers. So it became very problematic, as it is for anyone that still tries to operate in London now. Let alone now, actually, you'd have to get charged every time you take an old car on the road. So, in hindsight, we categorically did the right thing by moving up here, and it's a much better environment to operate from, not just from our point of view, but from a client's point of view. It's a much nicer experience than the hustle and bustle. We've got plenty of parking and plenty of space, and the roads are empty.
That's true. It's an easy drive from the M25, the A1M. I found it very quickly. I mean, I've seen pictures of it for many times, but it's the first time I'm here, and it is absolutely a beautiful sight. The barn restorations are absolutely truly fantastic. It's very much a mixture of cutting-edge technology and heritage in those barns. I mean, how did you manage to achieve that?
Money.
Desire, council saying this is how you're going to have to do it?
Yeah, well, it was all part of the deep dive into us thinking what we do for the future. And part of that deep dive was trying to recognise and identify what it is that clients want and expect. And yes, we've produced an environment which is a pleasure for people to attend, where the workshops have got plenty of space around the motor cars, so they're not falling over one another when they're working on it. It's a nice, quiet environment where trained technicians who know what they're doing, don't need supervision, can get on with the tasks. It's the destination, and we do find, unlike London, where people would give us 45 minutes, people will arrive with us here from overseas in the UK. We'll sit down, have a cup of coffee and de-stress and have a look at some cars in the show, go and have a look around the workshops, chit-chat, generally 2 to 3 hour visits, which is time-consuming, but it's a much nicer environment for them to visit, much nicer experience than going into a car showroom on a high street in London.
I think you say this is a destination, and you're dead correct. And also, you're pretty well known, certainly to me and for a lot of Aston people, for your events. Because when people own a lovely classic car or a lovely Aston Martin, they want to do something with it, and you've recognised that, haven't you?
Yes, it's all part of it. It's all very well selling cars and people taking them home, putting them in garages and barns, but what are they going to do with them once they've got them? So, yes, we do the event. It encourages people to use their cars. Ultimately, that means they're going to need a bit of service. But what it is, it just means that we're encouraging people to enjoy the experience of an older motor car and taking it out, meeting other people who are like-minded. And, yeah, they might come here and talk tyres and clutches, but so what? It's kind of bringing people together who are like-minded, have the same appreciations, and giving them an excuse to get the car out and come and visit us and visit their chums and have a coffee and a sausage roll or whatever it is that we're doing on those particular events, which we're doing 3 of this year. It's called 10-2 Club, and there'll be this spring, summer and autumn. And then we also do events we've done for several years with the local area, the Owners Club, with a community called Supercar Driver, Piston Heads driving groups and so on. It's relatively easy for us to do and enjoyable for people to come to see, and it just helps manifest and precipitate the whole classic car thing. I mean, why do you want a car? To use it, surely.
To use it entirely. And I think one of the other events that you're doing this year, which you had done in previous years, and I was very fortunate enough to go on to those, is the Le Mans trip, the Club Tetra Rouge, and they are great parties. And I think I've been on one of them, and I don't remember seeing much of the racing actually. I think they are very enjoyable. I think that was a great initiative by you, and you're kicking it off again, hopefully again this year. Is that right?
Yeah. I did 25 trips to Le Mans. And a lot of those, most of them actually, were with us taking anywhere from 30 to 60 clients and guiding them for the weekend and putting and laying on accommodation and minibuses and tickets and food and drink and so on. So they did turn into 3-day parties, and of course the run down there. So great events, a lot of fun. It actually got to the point where I think the last one we did was 17, where actually it became more about the party and less about the race, which was slightly not what it was all about. So we did actually stop it because a lot of effort involved in doing it. And Le Mans itself has changed a bit. But this year is the 100th anniversary of the Le Mans race. I'm privileged to have gone to 25, or if not more of those. And it's going to be a special event. It's the first year of the hypercar series as well. So we're trying to put it all back together at the moment. We're hampered a little bit by Le Mans organises itself, but we're going to get past that. It'll just be for a small number of people, but a great one. And it'll be part of our 30-year celebrations, because we're trying to make a little bit of a thing about being 30 years old. I mean, there's in the time that I've been in this sphere, there have been lots of people that have come and gone in the classic car world. People that have set themselves up as dealers and disappeared. I think 30 years of doing what we do firmly establishes the business in what it does, and so I feel quite proud of that, and happy to shout about it a little bit.
Especially in this current climate, or past few years of, pandemics, Brexit, wherever side you're on, and current socio and economic climate. It's I think we need a celebration, don't we, Nick?
I think the word is it's been challenging in the last 3 years.
Challenging, that's right.
I think anything that you can celebrate, you have to these days if you're in that position. It has been. In fact, since we moved here, it's very much been, oh my goodness me, what Brexit. That was an uncertain period, and then we're getting over that, and then COVID kicks in, and we're getting over that, and then Ukraine kicks in, and we're getting over that, and then we get Trussonomics, but we've managed to get through it all, which is kind of interesting and I've got to say comforting in lots of ways, because if we have a period now of stability, it looks like we might, maybe.
Is there any wood? We haven't got. It must be a wooden dashboard and an Aston downstairs.
I'll touch my head. Then that's going to be good news for us as well. So it feels like a good year. 30-year celebration, Le Mans, a few events in the bag. and it's kicked off rather well as well. Actually, I mean, where are we now? 11th or 12th of January or something.
We are indeed, yes, and normally a quiet time, but I think you said it's.
No, we've had a good start to the year, and we're, if it keeps on going like this, we're going to be quite happy. So, yeah, doing this podcast is all these sorts of things. It's a bit like the video we did, which is on YouTube and accessible via our YouTube channel, Nicholas Me Company, Aston Martin. Diving back into your past and history does take your head into funny spaces, but it's quite interesting to do, and it's been very interesting taking feedback from that video that we did recently from some very well established Aston Martin collectors and people who don't know us as well, and very interesting conversation with someone from the States the other day saying, this is really interesting to hear that and to listen to that, because I came to the conclusion, this guy said, that I know you're a car dealer, but you're not a car dealer in the normal car dealer sense.
Is that a compliment?
Well, that's what I said to him. He said, yeah, absolutely. He said, "Listen, I've called you." But yeah, it was quite interesting, because that's really all about demystifying. Yeah. And so an open book and being, this is what we do. When there's no mystery here. Yeah. And this is how we like to deal with people. And so it's very useful. Any listeners, if you've got a little bit of time and a glass of whiskey to one side, I'd recommend having a little watch of that, because it's quite interesting, gives some insight into the subject that we've been talking about here, and then there's a little side video which is 30 memorable sales over 30 years, and they are memorable sales, and they're worth looking at too. I think, anyway. We're happy to get the feedback.
Yeah, well, the content from Nicholas Me, Aston Martin, is very good. I mean, please do search their YouTube channels or go to their website, and you'll find it's there. So, Nick, we're just about to wrap up. I really do thank you for your time. So we have been looking back in the past. On your full bore newsletter, which people can sign up for.
Yeah,
they
it's a free subscription. You can do it via the website. It's full bore, which is a twice a year, is a sort of 35 page magazine type, e-magazine you might call it, and then we also use the full bore mailing list for stock updates and shorter versions of full bore monthly. It goes out to 6,500 people. They're all people that have signed up. They're either owners of the cars, or they've sold a car to us, or they've bought parts or had services. And so it's a proper mailing list, and we find it extraordinarily effective when we're marketing a car, because we can put that information out to 6,500 people who are interested in the subject. Otherwise, they wouldn't have signed up. So anyone that wants to get that, it's a free one. It goes out. We enjoy doing it. We embed into that various different videos that are not just sales videos, and we put into that also events, programs, and news and stories. And so we call it Full Bore, the world of Aston Martin, the way we see it.
Year ahead, well, as Nick Me sees it, how do we look at it?
Interesting. So the latter part of last year, when people were asking me that question, I'd look at them in the eyes and say unpredictable. And yeah, it's still unpredictable, but I feel that actually this year is going to be quite a good year. And I say that because when you have uncertain times, and we've been through that with the Brexit, and we've been through it with COVID, and we've been through it with Ukraine, what you actually do is you store up a backlog of interest and business that isn't done because people are uncertain. And when you have a period of certainty, and I'm not going to say that 2023 is going to be certain, but it feels a little steadier, and provided we don't get another bombshell hit us, I think there are going to be people coming to market this year in a way that they might not have been done in the last few years. Certainly if inquiry levels this year and business that we've done this year is anything to go by, I'm very encouraged by it. Do I think the classic car business is going to go away? No, it's way too big. It represents several billions of revenue to this country per annum, whether it's car dealers dealing in cars, auction houses selling cars, service departments. It all carries VAT. It's massive income to the Exchequer. I don't think they have any interest in stopping the classic car trade or banning classic cars. There's lots of concessions with DVLA and so on surrounding classic cars. You go to any of the events, whether it's Bicester or Goodwood or Classic Le Mans or any of the classic car events, they're oversubscribed. So this isn't going to go away anytime soon. We've got quite a lot of product. When I first started, we were just dealing in V8s and DBs, which by definition are rare. They never built very many. Well, we've got Gaydon cars to think of now, and they built quite a few of those. So we've got plenty of cars to effectively, in the nicest possible way, put it, recycle over the next few years, and they're all going to need servicing and maintenance, and we are here, and we're very well placed now with space, great technicians, factory trained, we've got some great personnel, we're looking forward to a slightly more stable year, and I think if we have a more stable year in the economy, we're going to do very well.
That's encouraging news. I think it's an upbeat moment to finish on. Nick, must thank you very much for your time. I know you are a great supporter and enthusiast of the Aston Martin Heritage Trust, and spending your valuable time on this podcast is much appreciated. I really do. Thank you very much.
Gary, it's my pleasure. As you say, I support the trust. I've been an Aston man for a very long time, and I'm always happy to do these sorts of things. If people want to listen, they don't always want to listen to a car sales guy, do they?
No. In this case, they will, and I found it fascinating. Nick, thank you very much.
My pleasure. Thanks, Gary. Bye.
The Aston Martin Heritage Podcast. Subscribe and get new episodes delivered to your device automatically via AstonMartinHeritagePodcast.com.